Grain, and I want to welcome you to the Environmental Sustainability Webinar number 1. Today is Thursday, September 5th, 2019. And so you all know this session is being recorded. And when Jane is ready, when we're ready, she will let you know how to obtain the URL for this particular session. And we want to thank you for being here early today so that we can get connected, and it helps us all to start close to the starting time. Now I'd like to turn the mic over to Jane Stallman, our webinar leader.
Thanks, Kathy. It looks like Ken Gilbert just joined us. And Ken, this is Jane Stallman. It's great to have you joining this webinar. Would you like to do a quick sound check so we know that you're connected auditorily? You can also put a note in the chat pod if you're having difficulty getting audio. So Ken, I think we'll go ahead and go to the start of the webinar. I don't want to hold us up too much, but we're hoping that you'll be able to speak, and you and Kathy can work on making that happen. This is the first of 3 environmental sustainability webinars that Caitlin Sarro from the Institute of Cultural Affairs and I are hosting. I'm representing the Center for Strategic Facilitation, and Caitlin is representing the Institute of Cultural Affairs. And we have a passion about environmental sustainability. It's Caitlin's pretty much full-time job, and it's been my passion for many, many years. And one of the joys of this has been to be able to reach out to others who are working in this field to put together the webinars. I want to thank also Carolyn Blady from Alameda County Sustainability, who's been on the design team and has been instrumental in creating these webinars. She will be speaking at our second one about the work of the incredible work that they are doing in Alameda County in California. Let's see what else I want to say. Kathy has talked about muting when we're not speaking, and I just want to review very quickly the purpose of this webinar. This was the purpose statement that Caitlin and Carolyn and I put together as we started thinking about doing these webinars. And Caitlin, I'm wondering if you would be willing to read it for us. I know you've been on mute, but you're the one who did most of the work on this. It'd be great to hear it in your voice.
You can hear me, right? Awesome. So, human-caused climate change is a defining issue of our time. These webinars focus on the application of participatory methods, the Institute of Cultural Affairs, Technology of Participation, or TOP methods, and other participatory methods to move local communities and organizations to take just and impactful climate actions. This webinar will be an opportunity to, number 1, expand your thinking on environmental sustainability, to also learn more from specific examples and case stories about engaging communities in climate change initiatives, and finally to exchange with others in the field. And I'm complete.
Thanks, Caitlin. So I want to point out also that we have a sort of an interesting way of thinking about environmental sustainability. It's not like we're building windmills or we're putting in solar housing. Those are all important things to do. We're not doing research on environmental sustainability, but we are committed to the use of participatory methods in helping organizations and communities shape their own future in a way that ensures their future and the future of our Earth. Adam and I are in Ecuador right now and dealing with the really horrific situations that we have in the Amazon with the fires. So we're all interconnected in very significant ways. And our particular focus on environmental sustainability is people working together to define and chart their own future in a way that supports our Earth. We're going to do a quick review of the agenda. We're going to start with you introducing yourselves. You'll see there that we've got overview of the webinar, then introductions. You're going to give your name, your location, and the name of one environmental sustainability project in which you have been engaged. You are now or you have been engaged. For this activity, we're going to ask you to unmute, and we'll start with Bridget at the top of the participant list, and we'll go down. Then we're going to move into presentations. Caitlin is going to share the work of the Institute of Cultural Affairs USA and the incredible things they have done in Chicago around climate change, both in terms of the building, which she'll talk about at a later webinar, but also in organizing the 77 neighborhoods in Chicago for an environmental focus, out of which came the Chicago Sustainability Leaders Network. And then Adam, who I got to meet at a session in Ecuador, in Cuenca, has been doing work in the Ecuadorian Amazonian communities to ensure that there's biocorridors, or trying to ensure that there's biocorridors, and he'll talk more about that. He really opened up my mind to a different way of thinking about biocorridors, and doing it with the indigenous communities that are represented in our southeastern Amazon. And it's possible, Adam, you're doing work up north too, but right now it's primarily the southeastern section of Ecuador's Amazon. And then Kassandra will talk about a really interesting project, an organization called Plant Chicago, which is looking at how to build a circular economy within this facility and building. I'm not familiar with it personally. Caitlin brought this project into our work, and we're very excited that she's able to join us and be with us today. We'll have brief opportunities for questions for clarification during each of the presentations, but at the end of the three presentations, we'll have all the speakers available for what we're calling questions of significance. And those questions are ones that you might want to use on the note page that we sent out, where you have a way of thinking about what people are saying. What are the key points? What are some questions I have? What's an insight that's blooming? So if you have that, you're welcome to take notes, and then when we get to the question of significance, you'll be ready to put in the chat box those questions that you have. We'll then look at what's next, and there are some what's next, and we'll share that with you. And we'll do a closing reflection. We're targeted for 2 hours. We probably will stay. Last time we ended right on time. I was very impressed with ourselves. I'm going to serve in the role of sort of orchestrator of this, and for our presenters, I'll give you about a 3-minute warning when you get close to the time at the end of your presentation. And the last thing I'd like to comment on and give you a moment to answer, there are 2 little polls on the right under the Earth. One says, how much of Earth's resources do we use each year compared to what Earth can regenerate? And I see that 5 people have responded to that, and others can also respond to that. And then there's another poll which says, which country just got the prestigious Level 3 Airport Environmental Sustainability Award? And I see one person has responded to that. You can't see that yet because I have not broadcast the results. Or I guess maybe Kathy did. So please put what you think those answers are, and then we're going to move into Caitlin's presentation. We'll give you just a minute to put your responses in. You see Cassie's doing it. I also see that Kathleen has joined us. Kathleen, welcome. I'm sure you know how to do your sound so that it'll work. But if you want to just speak up a little bit and we can hear your voice, that would be great too. Okay, looks like the typing has stopped. I see only 7 answers in some of these, so What is that prestigious Level 3 Airport Environmental Sustainability Award? We'll give you a chance to come back to that at some point soon at the end of the session. All right, so Caitlin, I'm going to turn the session over to you, and we have an opportunity to hear about the work that has been happening in Chicago with both developing leadership capacity and specific initiatives that are making a difference in Chicago.
Great. So I'm going to be talking about specifically a citywide network of individuals, organizations, and communities that we organize around sustainability, and the project that got us there, which in terms of acronym soup is called Accelerate. That got us to that network, which we'll call Accelerate 77. So first off, who am I and what is the Institute of Cultural Affairs? So I am a program manager for this nonprofit, which has done a variety of different things over the course of about 50 years. But specifically, I'll talk within the scope of our Chicago-based programming. We are a nonprofit, not a government institution. Sometimes Institute of Cultural Affairs is confused with being a part of the government, and it's not. We have this asset-based community development lens to our work. We're also a Chicago stakeholder. We have an 8-story building on the north side, which Jane mentioned will be talked a little bit more specifically later on in a different webinar. But just know that we are a resident of Chicago, but our work is not just localized here. We have many different networks. We're a network of networks to some extent. We work with a network of facilitators nationally. We also have a network internationally. But for this specific webinar, I'll be talking about our work here in Chicago, which when we think about why we did this project, our role as a stakeholder, our asset-based community development lens, the fact that we have trained facilitators in participatory methods, and our 50-year history of working in rural and urban communities made us a prime candidate to get involved around the community here in Chicago, specifically around sustainability. So when you think about the Institute of Cultural Affairs, something I'll also say is that our mission is to build a just and equitable society in harmony with planet Earth. So we take that very seriously and use our expertise to facilitate a network of people around the city, but how did we get to that place? The city of Chicago, if you're not familiar, has these 77 designated community areas. If you see this map, that's what you're looking at. But something to say about Chicago in general is that it is very, to some extent, there's many different types of silos. There's geographic silos. There's different regions. There's the south side, north side, west side is usually how it's discussed. But then there's these 77 other areas which don't even match with wards, and there's all sorts of other layers of division. But there's also silos outside of just geography. There's cultural silos with a history of redlining in the city, and in general, economic divisions, which is only exacerbated in terms of the economics of nonprofits and working in community, which often drives competition between stakeholders that otherwise should be able to find areas of collaboration. Another image that is a bit hard to go against is this idea of downtown Chicago having this hub of expertise. So this project, before we actually took it on, was very much steeped in that idea of having expertise being centralized downtown, and was put in a bit of a question when the Department of Environment closed. So that happened in 2011, and that's really when Accelerate 77 became an initiative that ICA was going to take on. So Accelerate 77 is named after the 77 community areas in Chicago, and its sort of subtitle is Accelerating Sustainable Initiatives in Chicago's 77 Communities. So that part makes sense. Now, what was this project? To some extent, it started with different phases. The first being identifying what existed and then connecting them with each other. So when we defined sustainability, it was very holistic. It had elements of environmental sustainability, economic factors, and also cultural elements. So we were very open to finding and uncovering and showcasing the initiatives that were already happening across the city, not just in the downtown area, particularly because when that department closed, people were looking for the, well, now where do I go to access resources and information? So what did we do? We used our facilitation and planning skills to start this program, and the first steps was partnering with another network, which was university students and universities in general. We partnered with 5 Chicago-based universities as well as Oklahoma City to start an asset mapping initiative. We trained and involved these university students to go out into the communities and really find and uncover what already existed. This project wasn't about starting something new. It was about using the assets and resources we already have and just making them a little bit easier to find. So I could go more into that, but what I'll say is that in addition to documenting them internally, we also made an online map that's public. So the Accelerate 77 asset map is still up, still a little bit outdated, and it's something that people can use to find what is in their community area. The other part of identifying and making these connections was we brought as many community areas together in one place on one day in something called the Sharing Approaches at Work conference, or the short title is the Share Fair in 2012. So as part of this asset mapping initiative, we were both inviting people, finding out more about what they were doing, and then trying to gather them into one place at one time. And what I'll say again is that this idea of sustainability being very holistic meant that the types of people in that room were, they often didn't know who each other were. So sometimes when you gather people around, say, a specific issue or issue-based organizing, the people in the room aren't necessarily new to each other, or they might know of each other. The idea of bringing together a very holistic understanding of sustainability across Chicago was we were really trying to spark connections between people who might not have known each other to begin with, which was really great. And in fact, nobody wanted to leave. We sort of got, so, you know, the lights had to be flickered to get everyone to leave Truman College, which is where we had the event. And everyone wanted to know what would be next. So that brings us a little bit more of our process. When we started this asset mapping initiative, we recognized that not everyone could get into one place at one time, so there were some follow-up sessions, and I'll just lump that all together to say that we did use this core group that was able to gather, and then some of the other people that we were able to meet with over the course of the asset mapping initiative to say that we had a representative number of people, enough to start having the conversation of what do we want to do. We didn't set out with an understanding of how these people would work together, but using our facilitation skills, recognized that if we had the right people in the room, they would figure out what we needed to do next. So this is just a small insight into the use of our the top action planning process, which when we brought people together, we facilitated them deciding how to work together, what would they potentially want to work on, and the first working groups really became the structure by which the network was both decided upon and then created. So this group came together, decided they wanted to formalize with the network, and how they did their initial governance was through working groups. When we come to the CSLN, the Chicago Sustainability Leaders Network, what that looks like now is a network of 250 or so individuals, around 170 to 200 organizations. It depends. Some members are signed up as individuals, and some are able to sign up what we call as grass tops members. And the general goal is to connect these leaders from across communities within the Chicagoland region. We really try to have a representative diversity within our group. So that geographic diversity that I had mentioned at the beginning, people are coming from many different disciplines to build up our holistic lens. There's race and gender diversity, and this idea of scope, where larger institutions as well as smaller institutions are able to have as much voice and participation. What this usually tends to mean in terms of the work of this group is that we're trying to do sharing resources, supporting each other's work, this idea of collaborating and building a stronger collective voice and nurturing equitable and impactful relationships with policy members, which I'll go a little bit more into in the next slide. And I'll just pause to say that this is what you're looking at, a few of our members, not all of them obviously, but in so much as I'm a facilitator of this network, the work of our network itself would not be possible without our incredible members, and I wanted to give them the due props and include some of their faces in this presentation. So, a little bit of a peek into the back end, since when we're talking about facilitation. The main way that this network works in terms of building relationships is in two distinct ways. There's the level of peer-to-peer, or a horizontal relationship building, and this, what we have called, we've made up this term, the in-between space, where the idea of top-down entities or policymakers, really large institutions, are able to have a mutually beneficial relationship with the bottom-up or grassroots. So peer-to-peer can be difficult to build that relationship, particularly because this culture of competition that I had mentioned before, which is often economically driven. If you're a very small community entity and you're trying to stand out within grant writing or government funds, that might, it does tend to pit you against your neighbor, for example. Oh. I'm going to pause. I'm seeing something about the slides. Do you not see the slides as I move them?
This is Karen. They weren't advancing,
Yeah.
And then I saw that I have a little remote on the screen, and then I pushed it, and it started advancing them. So I just wanted to make sure everyone else do that.
Well, tech question. Is there a way that I can control what everyone sees?
Karen, I need to ask you to mute because all of a sudden I'm hearing Caitlin just so loud. But anyway, ask your question again, Caitlin. Maybe I can help you. This is Kathy.
I think it would be easier for everyone else if I could move the presentation and they would see the slides that I'm on.
Well, these buttons at the bottom will help you to move it forward. Yes.
I'm hearing that not everyone was seeing that.
They should be. I don't know why they're not. If you're on an iPad or a cell phone, maybe you're having trouble with that.
Yeah, I got an answer for you guys. If you click as an attendee, as a participant, on the bottom of Caitlin's screen, on the bottom right-hand side, there's a button that says Sync. If you press Sync, then she controls your slides.
Beautiful answer.
Great. Let me control your slides. For anyone who, if you're not synced up, where we are is there's these fish and then the in-between space. Oh, you can't hear me. Tech problems galore.
And Caitlin, I'm going to expand the screen again so that it's more visible.
Sure. Okay, I'm just gonna keep rolling with it. So I was describing the peer-to-peer dynamic and the in-between space. What I'll just emphasize is that since we're not an issue-based organizer, the peer-to-peer can be a little bit difficult since often, especially within the Chicago community organizing dynamic, the power building is very popular. But we see a lot of value in having a holistic lens. This idea of environmental justice being just as interconnected with, say, immigration reform and other equal housing rights. Those are all related, and so the strength of our network and the niche that we're trying to fill is this idea of holistic sustainability. And then I will move us forward. So if we're not an issue-based organizer, but perhaps a holistic sustainability organizer, what are we really organizing around? We have these values. So these come out within our work in different ways, but I'll just read them off. Advocating for public space, ensuring meaningful community engagement, conserving community history and culture, prioritizing equity and inclusivity, and collaborate creatively and connect citywide. These are the main values we tried to hold as a network, both in the way that we relate to each other and the work that we do with our community. What does that tend to look like? So what does our network do? We have in-person meetings. So that's this regularly rotating, right now it's bi-monthly meeting that is in a different part of the city, and usually is designed to highlight a community asset that people can go to after the fact. So we lift up something that is here in the city. Usually it's a physical place, but sometimes it can also just be a program, so that after that in-person meeting, people can go to there, and we call them hubs, where they can access resources and information around sustainability. Another way that this network operates is through working groups, which I've mentioned a bit before, and these working groups are made up of members and ICA staff, which I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. There's also collaborative projects and events, and these are great in terms of building both peer-to-peer relationships as well as with the community, a greater understanding and education for sustainability. So a word about our shared leadership model. This is how we do direction setting and the model that we're currently working off of. So it started with ICA staff. The Accelerate 77 project specifically so Accelerate 77 was an Institute of Cultural Affairs initiative. We're currently in this space of staff and community working together on direction setting, and we're hoping that in time we'll be able to turn over the leadership of our network entirely over to community members. When we consider ourselves as the ICA, we describe ourselves as the backbone organization of this very member-driven network. So in terms of what we've learned so far, I wanted to dig into a little bit more of our accomplishments in the work that we do. Collaborative events is, as I mentioned, a great opportunity to build relationships between members. And I'll say that there's a structure by which a collaborative event is a CSLN event versus just a member event. And that requires that there are multiple members with different perspectives that are working together to bring this holistic lens. What you're looking at right now is there's currently a Nourish Community series, which is building upon a series that was also last year. And you'll just see, as you read over the titles, that none of them are exactly the same. They have different partners, and they really try and bring a holistic lens. And I would also say that these events are great to grow a participant's perspectives of sustainability. Someone might be interested in, for example, a community bike ride, and by the time they leave the event, they'll have a greater cultural context for that area, as well as perhaps ecological knowledge and tips for the region.
Caitlin, you have a couple more minutes.
I'm almost done. So the collaborative projects that we have are very powerful to build relationships between our members, as well as replicable outputs. The example I chose was the Illinois Science and Energy Innovation Foundation funded a culturally appropriate smart grid education project that, while it was designed around energy education specifically, it's really engaged conversation on different cultural values, economic values, and environmentalism broadly. So it's a toolkit that is replicable for this specific topic, as well as culturally appropriate education for other topics. Also, we have the longest standing working group, which is a CSLN policy group, so digging a little bit more into that in-between space. And this has done many different things. Some are more internal. We've had in-person roundtables with the Chief Sustainability Officer, where we were discussing values or particular topic areas and building access and understanding for our members. We've also had public actions with this working group. What you're looking at right now are just some snippets from a public recycling meeting series, which was around reducing citywide contamination rates. And the final product of that was written up and shared with the City of Chicago. They were They're a part of our stakeholders within the meeting. And another more recent achievement was that we were recognized and included in the City of Chicago's Resiliency Plan. While sustainability goals are more maybe specifically environmental within the plan, we recognize that what is first needed is that social cohesion, not just between our peers, but with our policymakers. And I'll finish here by just saying that that social cohesion, which is necessary, is why we continue to facilitate this amazing network. I specifically have been working on this since 2012, and I'm complete and open to questions.
Well, I have an activity I would like us to do, Caitlin, because I did not do the introductions. And I think this would be a great point to do the introductions and have people say their name, their location, and then one point Caitlin made or one phrase that you heard her say. And I'm going to start, and then I'm going to go from Cassie to Kathy to Bridget. So if you see the attendee pause, the participant, we're just going to go straight down that. So one point or one phrase, your name, your location, and one point or one phrase. So this is like a very short tweet. And I'll start. I'm Jane Stallman. I'm in Cuenca, Ecuador. And I heard the phrase, let's talk trash. I love that phrase. Cassie, let's go to you. And remember, you have...
All right. Hello, my name is Kathy Hinrichsen, and I am Chicago, Illinois, coming from Plant Chicago. And I liked when Caitlin was talking about the in-between space, which I think is not frequently talked about.
Hi, this is Kathy McGrain, and I'm in Anoka, Minnesota. And I just want to add this because I've been kind of busy, so I haven't listened real well. But I want to just say that I was in on the first session of creating the 77 project. I'm complete, and I will pass to Bridget Riley.
Hi, Bridget Riley. From Minneapolis, Minnesota. I liked hearing about the grass tops. Thank you. I'm complete.
Risa, this is Kathy. Please open your microphone so you can share next, and then it'll go on to Carolyn, and then John. Carolyn, would you go ahead, please?
Yes, Carolyn Blady. I'm in Oakland, California, and the phrase that stuck with me was staff and community direction setting. I'm complete, and I'll pass it to John.
You unmute your microphone by clicking the icon, the green icon microphone at the top of the Adobe Room. Joshua just shared in the chat pod. He says, Josh Phillips here, Chicago, Illinois, having an audio mic issues. Heard or read that recycling in Chicago can be hard. Totally relate. And let's move on to...
Thanks, Josh. And John, are you having audio now? Okay, we're not hearing you. So you can add a little note in the chat box and then we'll get you on. Let's move on down to Karen. And Karen, you'll need to unmute.
This is Karen Bain. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. And what is sticking with me is how powerful it is to bring so many different neighborhoods and groups together to make them aware of each other. And I'm complete and pass.
Hi, this is Kathleen Paulo. I'm in Oakland, California. Sorry, there were some other things going on here, so I didn't hear as much as I wanted to, but it was the 77 areas in Chicago that stuck with me. I'm complete. Off to Ken.
Ken, we're not seeing your microphone going. You can put something in the chat pod if you'd like, or if we get your microphone going, we'll come back and pick you up. Rebecca.
Yeah, this is Rebecca Mayfield. I'm in Cuenca, Ecuador, and social cohesion. I really like that phrase. I'm complete.
And Ricardo. Ricardo, you're going to need to unmute your microphone. We didn't do a sound check with you either, so I'm not sure that you have audio. Okay, it looks like you're putting something in the chat box. And John Porterfield is also typing. And Robert, let's go to you. Oh.
Hi, this is Robert. I'm in San Leandro, California. And the phrase that stuck out for me was also social cohesion. And I'm complete.
All right, let's go pick up Adam, and then we'll come back down the list and hopefully pick up those that weren't available. So Adam, we'll need you to unmute.
Hi everyone. I was enjoying the bottom-up concept with most of the processes I've been involved with. It's really person to person at the most local, small level that is driving the process.
Thank you. And Brissa, we didn't hear you speak. You're welcome to put something in the chat pod or unmute and share your response. Oh, John, you're the John Porterfield in Cuenca. So we're going to go on to John, and John wrote, I'm in Cuenca also. I liked comment on getting familiar with neighborhood cultures. And I think John has a history with the ICA. Similar to someone we had on earlier who was speaking. Joshua, we got your comment. Ken, we have not heard from you yet. You're welcome to put something in the chat box, or you are also welcome to speak. We'll give you a second to see if you can speak. Okay, I don't see Ken speaking, and Ricardo, you're welcome to unmute your microphone and say where you are and one point in the presentation that stood out to you. You see that you got a hi in the chat box.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? I'm in Guayaquil, in Ecuador, and I'm very interested about the Amazon bio corridor.
Thank you, Ricardo. It's great to have you on the call. I'm going to be staying at Ricardo's hotel in just a few days. All right, let us move on. If anybody else have questions for clarification for Caitlin, and you can indicate that by going up to the little person with their hand up. I'm going to raise my hand so you see it. It's at the top of the screen. There's a little person with a hand up. And you can raise your hand, and that would indicate that you have a question for clarification you'd like to share. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So, Caitlin, I'll go ahead and I'll introduce Adam Jebb, who is a friend and a colleague in Cuenca, Ecuador. I don't know if, John, you know Adam or not, but or Rebecca, but Adam has spoken at some meetings that I've participated in and both opened up my mind about what a biocorridor actually is. And I'm going to switch us into Adam's presentation here. And but also he has presented with other indigenous groups that have also been in the room, and the combination of working with indigenous communities and looking at biological conservation is, to me, a really important thing as we watch part of our Amazon burning, at least in Brazil, and state policies that are absurd. So, Adam, welcome. We're so glad you could be here today. Adam was in the United States 2 days ago. He just got back in town, and we really appreciate you making the effort to be here. So welcome.
Thanks, Jane. Can you hear me clearly?
I can.
Okay, cool. I'm just thinking right here, just to make sure my slides work well. I'm going to go forward one slide, backward one slide. Perfect. I'm ready to go. Okay, so my name's Adam Jeb. I've been in Ecuador for a few years with my family in Cuenca. I've got a few projects around a biocorridor happening in the Ecuadorian Amazon, but before that I lived in Vermont, and I had a number of environmental projects that turned from one thing into other things and eventually morphed into being full biocorridor research projects in the southern Vermont area. So I'm going to be talking here about community participation for long-term sustainability of indigenous territory in the Ecuadorian Amazon. The theme, as mentioned, is biocorridors in Marlborough, Vermont, where I started as the chairman of the Conservation Commission. And then that project ended up including about 7 or 8 towns in southern Vermont. In the Ecuadorian Amazon, we're starting with the Shiwiar territory, but we're actually also working with indigenous groups in and around that area beyond just the Shiwiar. Before I get onto that, since we're hearing all about the fires, the importance of the Amazon rainforest is mostly unknown. We do hear about carbon dioxide goes in and oxygen comes out. I think that we often hear about the Amazon being a climate stabilizer at a grand scale. Also that there's medicines for diversity of ailments, and there's the ecological diversity along with that. But the truth is that maybe 1% of what's going on in the Amazon is actually known by humans. And I think it's probably 1/10 of 1%. It's so complicated out there. And I could spend an hour talking about how much we don't know, but I'm going to move on to my next slide, which is about diversity. Supposedly the highest diversity blue areas are low diversity, but these are really guesstimates because the areas are so vast and it's hard to get people out there to really field check this. And so there's a lot of maps that show South American diversity, but the reality is another thing altogether, partially because of human development. Is everyone looking at this a map of upper South America with a white area sort of across it?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so in the white area, this is actually a development corridor that I discovered recently that none of the big NGOs on the planet were onto. It's 1,600-mile long corridor of pastures, houses, roads, just human use, which is completely actually cutting off the Amazon from the Andes. The Amazon and the Andes are actually the same ecological body. And so this is really bad news. It's not in the news yet, but it's a huge situation that we'll be seeing in the news in upcoming months. Here is a close-up of the Ecuadorian Amazon on the right, the Andes, and Ecuador on the left, the coastal areas. Ecuador is quite interesting because it is such a small area, but it has incredible diversity in that teeny area. There's the shortest distance between the Amazon and the Pacific anywhere in South America. There's a lot of ecotones or small microclimates in that area, which makes it really complicated, which is a good thing because species thrive off of a complicated and diverse ecosystem. Elevations in the project area where I'm working at range from about 1,500 to 17,000 feet. You could eat breakfast in the Amazon, do lunch in the Andes, and do dinner on the Pacific. It's an amazing situation that we have down there. Here is a picture of a biocorridor. I'm putting forth that there's a lot of concepts that are sustainable. I like seeing the previous one about sustainability in cities. I'm thinking more about sustainability in a biological sense. This photo shows a forest in the foreground, a strip of forest that continues to forests off in the background. On the left and the right are areas where humans have completely removed the natural systems. The little diagram on the right sort of shows how there's 2 green areas with some animals crossing from one to the other. But the reality is that everything needs to migrate insects, even trees are migrating. Forest communities migrate over thousands of years, and they're driven by glacial epochs. And right now we're in interglacial, so things are migrating up. Without biocorridors, there'll be a giant loss of diversity on the planet. We're already looking at a large diversity drop, but biocorridors are actually critical because islands of habitat are not able to cope with changing climate because the animals can't move far enough to meet their needs when the climate changes, let's say over a few hundred years. We're really accelerating the change right now. Well, you've seen this definition up above. A biocorridor is a geographically defined area which provides connectivity between landscapes, ecosystems, habitats, and ensures the maintenance of biodiversity and ecological and evolutionary processes. Well, that's sort of scientific. I think the previous diagram showed it well enough, where we can imagine that animals have a certain food source in the spring, a different food source in the summer, and yet another food source in the fall. And so most animals have to migrate long distances to meet their food needs, unlike humans that can go to the same supermarket all the time. Community action for biocorridor conservation in Vermont was a process that I lived through for 10 or 15 years. Here we have a couple pictures of a town, Newfane, a meeting in Marlborough, Vermont, a fox crossing the road, and a part of the Green Mountains. In Vermont, we engaged the community by having people monitor roadsides, and when there quarter inch of snow falls, we could teach people what every track was, whether it was a weasel or a coyote or whatever animal was crossing the road. And so we got people wandering the roadsides and sending back data as to what animals were crossing the roads in that neighborhood, and it really took off in all the different parts of our towns, where people were going back home and talking about what they saw crossing the roads as far as tracks concerned. We're doing a similar process now in Ecuador, although it's really different. The housing is different. The picture on the lower left is people from the Achuar tribe looking at a map that I brought where I proposed possibilities just so they could consider what a biocorridor might look like in the Ecuadorian Amazon, where it's roadless. But we're behind the frontier in these projects, and the frontier is moving quickly. So it's really an opportunity. In Vermont, of course, the frontier passed a long time ago. Fragmentation is heavy, and there's lots of roads. Here in Ecuador, it's all the opposite. The picture on the lower right is flying over the Chihuahua territory, and you can see a little rain shower falling down on just the ancient rainforest. There's an anteater above. Right now, I'm hoping people are looking at a slide that has a cosmic frog on a leaf. Does anyone want to confirm that?
Yeah.
Great. So it's interesting the contrasts and similarities between the biocorridor process in Vermont and in Ecuador. In Ecuador, 90% of resource use is all local. So people are eating out of the rainforest, they're building houses out of the rainforest, they're getting 5% of their materials from far away. In Vermont, it was the opposite. We're getting food from California, clothing from who knows where, furniture from really far away. So that's one of the points that is a super contrast. Rivers are a key resource, as shown in this lower right picture. Not only are they the main source of transportation, but they're also a source of protein and recreation. So rivers are key, and diversity is foremost in these communities. Community-based land use planning is a heart-based process that engages culture. In Vermont, when we started defining our land use mapping process, we actually didn't really know where we were going, to be honest. We were just in it for the day and planning little by little as we went. People started to tell stories in the meetings, and then we also trained people to become amateur trackers in different communities where they would tell the stories on their dinner tables about what animals they saw crossing the roads. More joined in the process. Pretty soon there was bigger meetings. People were really expressing their heart's desire in these meetings, and the process took off and became wider and wider. Other towns started their own processes. It was amazing to see the power of stories. Oh, the slide just tried to not move forward. Okay, I'm on a slide that says the power of storytelling. Hope everyone else is as well. The power of storytelling is a driving force that engages communities. Stories have been the basis of culture from the beginning of time. They lay the foundation of culture from caves to computers. It's just been a permanent human thing that stories are telling our lives, telling about everything. They connect people and reduce differences, transcend generations, are timeless links to ancient traditions, legends, and myths, and they share passions, sadness, hardships, and joys. So we, with our tracking project around southern Vermont, engaged the communities in a way that stories spread far and wide. Sometimes the stories were really positive, other times they were negative. In Vermont, people are very driven by private property rights and what can they do on their land or not do. So some of the stories were around fear of losing property rights, private property rights, because people are wondering, well, if it's a road crossing and my property is a critical migration corridor, well, then what? But most of the stories were really positive, and we ended up having some significant action in our mapping that I'll show in a couple slides. When the community owns the process and defines what success means, the results end up defining their cultural identity. Well, of the people, by the people, for the people, these processes define the culture because it's really the people themselves that are driving the process. And I'll show you how culture is represented in our maps in Vermont. So on the left, this is a Marlborough, Vermont land use planning map. And the culture can be shown in these colors here. The dark green areas are agricultural, and people in Vermont are all about their cheese and their milk and everything that they can make on the land. So the fact that we have a bunch of dark green areas in our town really shows the culture of Vermont and their desire to create products that are high quality food items. It's big. Farmers markets really taken off. Then this pale green color is most of town. That was an area that we zoned for wildlife habitat priority. And so people can build out there, but they do have to be super careful, and there's a process that they go through with meetings with the select board, not the select board, sorry, the planning board. And so that really defines our culture. People love wildlife and want to protect the diversity. In magenta here is the village district. In Vermont, people are all about having a tight village district and reducing suburban sprawl. And so this map shows a lot of culture in the map. What we're trying to do with the Shiwiar tribe on the right, their map is rather basic. They have only 1,000 people living on 500,000 acres of ancient rainforest. And so we're going to go through a process where they will create maps that represent their culture. What they've spoken about so far is wanting to have permaculture and ecotourism. They, in their maps, will most likely be showing village districts and cultivation areas. Permaculture will be key. In the forests of Ecuador, some people might think it's all wild, but the reality is that there's foods and medicines all over the place, and that people have been propagating them for thousands of years. So these types of maps.
Your voice has gotten soft. I'm wondering if you need to adjust your mic.
Well, I turned up the volume a little bit. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
so
you also have about another 4 minutes.
Yep, that's about perfect. So on the right, we can see the sort of the blank map of the Shiwiar territory, where we will be working to help them create maps that represent their culture. Just as we see on the left, we're going to facilitate a community process where there'll be series of meetings in the Shiwiar territory. We have to fly out in little planes, land in the middle of nowhere, and well, not the middle of nowhere for them. We'll be landing in their larger villages and have meetings, they're saying, of up to 100 people, many of which will be flown in from villages that are in remote parts of their own territory. And I'm excited to see how, well, I saw how the Marlborough map changed from something much different to this, which represents the cultures. What are we going to see in the CSLN territory map? I'm excited for that. Outcomes. Local culture is strengthened by being engaged in an important community process. Having a series of meetings in rural areas where people tend to have remote lives, but then they come together for these meetings and they may not disagree, or they may disagree a lot, but they really get to know each other better and understand each other better through the community process. Land use mapping reflects the culture and helps communities to respond to threats and seize opportunities. In the situation where the Shiwi are, if they don't want oil drilling in their territory, right now they can say they don't want oil drilling, but our land use maps are going to show how they really use their territory and need the whole territory to thrive sustainably, as they have always. And there's areas where the government may think drilling is easy to do, but with the land use planning situation that we're going to be doing, we'll be able to show that rivers would be poisoned that lead right to schoolhouses. A lot of details that just aren't shown because there's no quality maps out there. So sustainability improves through widespread community support for the protection of local natural resources. When people know what's behind their little area, that's different than when a community all discusses what they're aware of in the community for natural resources and what they want to protect. A lot of times they'll tell stories about, well, when they were a kid, what they did, the places they went, the things they could do 30 or 40 years ago. And we can see in the United States the change over the last 40 years has been dramatic. And the frontier is close to these territories, and soon they're going to be seeing a pressure that's really large. The pressure is already notable. They've received, through rumor that the government wants to drill in their territory, and they're really upset about that. And so my idea is the best way to combat a bad plan is to have a good plan. And the only way we can have a good plan is to have a plan that the community creates and supports. And so we'll be doing this community-based process for sustainable use of resources in the Ecuadorian Amazon. We've already started with some basic meetings. We'll be moving forward. And the general hope is that since a large part of the Amazon is indigenous territories, and that most territories do not have modern maps that have written segments about what each segment, which each color in the map means, so that they could express their desires to the outside world. We need this process to spread further and beyond just the Ecuadorian Amazon. This winter will be the beginning of what I hope is an important process. And that's all I have to say for the moment. Thanks for having me, Jane and Caitlin.
Adam, thank you. I would like to just make one point of clarification. You can let me know if I'm correct or not. This is Jane. And one of the things I think I learned in one of your presentations is that often biocorridors are thought of like the forest in the Andes or the water or the river in the Amazon. They're in a stratified area. And what you have discerned and are trying to work with the tribal groups on is these corridors go down and up the Andes, down and up through the Amazon valleys. And when you have that, was it 1,600 miles of development that goes through the eastern side of the Andes? Animals, plants, insects, birds have a very hard time migrating. Would you just comment on that?
So what happens is that every 20 to 100,000 years, the Andes fill with glaciers, and the wildlife, even entire forest communities, have to migrate down into the Amazon. Then you have what is happening now, which is that it's an interglacial and things are really warming up, and wildlife, including entire forest communities, are migrating slowly, and they want to get back to the Andes, but their passage has been blocked because the development corridor is in their way. And so there's basically a giant ecological crisis happening in the Amazon right now, where, for example, in the age of the dinosaurs, the average Earth temperature was 8 degrees higher and there was no glaciers anywhere on the planet. If we head into an epoch like that, most of the diversity of the Amazon is going to need the lower Andes because it's cooler in the mountains, and that's where they'll find refuge for this heating up period. And so the BioCorridor project is we've identified a few holes in the development corridor, and so it's like a global campaign to create migration corridors for wildlife and forest communities such that the diversity of the Amazon can actually reach the Andes anywhere versus nowhere. And unless there's some solid action right now, it's not going to happen. Things are looking good though. There's a process that I've been working on for a year now where we're looking for millions of dollars, maybe 20 to 30 million, to conserve a 100,000 acre migration corridor between the Andes and the Amazon in Ecuador. And it's looking like there's a lot of support for that. That migration corridor actually points directly at the indigenous territories where we're looking to continue the biological or migration corridors, so that essentially there's a relationship. The indigenous territories on the flats have a direct relationship with the Andes that are nearby, and so we need to connect all the way through. And so there's the bigger process of a 100,000 acre biocorridor, but then within each indigenous territory, we're looking to create or have them create what they would like to see for migration corridors that are more smaller in scale, but inside each indigenous territory. Does that make any sense? It's sort of
thank you, Adam.
It's a lot to cover.
Hi, Adam. Congratulations
Let me
your
just
project
check. We have one person who has his hand raised, Ricardo.
I have a couple of questions. I'm sorry if you already answered them in your presentation. Well, my English is not that good, but I'm curious about exactly what the project about. Is the creation of the biocorridor has to do with obtaining from the government national park declaration, or are those already protected areas, or are those indigenous areas? So that was my question, and I also would like to know in what stage are you? Are you just conceiving the project, or are you in the middle, in the final part? And finally, you know, mining is actually a new problem in Ecuador. 10 years ago, the government talked about mining, but there was no actual big mining project. But now, especially in the southern Amazon, there are projects that are coming by. So have you found, is it actually mining a threat to creating this biocorridor?
Okay, so let me try to go back to your first question. We're not looking to create national parks, although we are looking to have the biocorridor plug directly into Sangay National Park. It's 1.3 million acres, and the source of Sangay National Park's biodiversity is actually in the Amazon right now. Picture, if we're going into a warming epoch, that the diversity of the Amazon is trying to migrate up into the Andes. And so this corridor that we're looking at in the area of Pablo Sexto would connect the indigenous territories to Sangay National Park. I'm already forgetting your question number 2, but your question number 3 was about mining. Yes, there's mining is definitely an issue in places. I'm not really thrilled about mining, but I have a car, I have a lot of frying pans in my kitchen, and I have an iPhone. So in our campaign, we are unable to be anti-mining because of all the products that especially Westerners are using depend on mining. And so we're looking at it more as a process of, okay, there's going to be some mining, but we can also try to save our biodiversity. In the past, what's happened is that maybe mining interests come in and they just start mining and there's no plan. So my idea is that let's have a plan where we can look at all of these elements together. So it's not just like the mining comes in before there's been a chance to consider the corridors. Essentially, the biocorridors in the area where I'm looking are going to need to be maybe 10 to 20% of the landscape. The vast majority of the landscape will be populated areas that get deforested for various reasons. But we really do need to save 20%. If we're smart about it, mining could be happening a little here and a little there, but it would be carefully considered after a planning process that looks at biocorridor options, not in a vacuum before the biocorridors are researched. Maybe you could tell me if there's one other question that you have that I didn't answer.
Adam, I think we're going to need to move forward because we've extended the time.
Okay, that's fine.
Ricardo, I'm hoping that you can connect with Adam, and maybe Adam will end up staying at El Manso Boutique Hotel next time they come to Guayaquil, and you can have a long visit. Adam, thank you so much. This was really quite amazing, and it's very helpful to learn a third time around for me even more about the work that you're doing. I'm going to move us forward to Kassandra's presentation, and Kassandra's working, Adam is working with the Amazon, Kassandra's working with Plant Chicago, and a very, maybe a microcosm of bringing together all of these different elements of how we can have a just and sustainable
Yeah, well, thank you
economy.
guys. This is
So
very exciting to
Cassandra,
be
thank
here.
you so much for
I too have a weird
participating, and I'm
connection
looking
with
forward to
Ecuador.
hearing your
I studied
presentation.
abroad in Quito and then worked in Mashpi, so very weird. Ecuador and Minnesota, what's the deal here? But I work with Plant Chicago, which is in back of the yards in Chicago's southwest side. I am the education manager there. Basically, Plant Chicago's mission is to cultivate local circular economies, which is kind of a weird, broad mission statement. But the idea of the circular economy is basically opposed to the linear form of economy, where you take stuff from the environment, you create a product, and then that product is designed for a one-time use, and then it gets thrown away, goes to a landfill or an incinerator. The idea with the circular economy is to try to reuse as much materials as possible. So the way that we cultivate local circular economies is through three main program areas, one of them being education programming, which I'll get into a little bit more in a minute, circular economy research, so trying to think about waste products, how can they be reused and be more innovative, and instead of being something that you just throw away, what is the potential opportunity of waste and trash? And then small business support and food access. So this is my fun little infographic. You got your linear economy bucket just overflowing with waste and such. Recycling economy, still kind of like a Band-Aid, but some sense of recycling and reuse. Whereas the circular economy is more of a spiral, and it gets fed back into the economy, is the idea. So this is just a nice statement. In a circular economy, conventional waste streams from one process are repurposed as inputs for another, creating a circular closed-loop model of reuse. The problem, here's a great sunset photo of some trash, gorgeous, but definitely this is the issue, right, is that we're producing all of this trash and we're running out of space for all of these things to go, and it's time to start getting innovative about our waste products. So Plant Chicago is based out of The Plant, which is a former meatpacking plant in Chicago's Back of the Yards neighborhood. Back of the Yards, for folks that don't really know much about Chicago, I know we got some Chicago people, but Back of the Yards was home to, at the turn of the century, 82% of the United States meat production, so it's really famous for meat and slaughterhouses, processing facilities. The facility that we're in was a former meatpacking plant from 1925 until 2007, and it was all pork processing, so we're talking bacon, spiral hams. The USDA shut down a lot of these slaughterhouses and packing facilities because they just couldn't keep up to code. And so one of the issues of this neighborhood and kind of the greater southwest side and further south side of Chicago is that you have all these former industrial buildings that no longer have a use. And so this building was actually sold as a strip and rip project, assuming whoever would purchase this building would strip it of all the valuable materials and then just completely rip it down. And so another big tenet of the circular economy is trying to figure out how can we reuse things that we already have as well. So the building itself is 94,000 square feet, and it's home to 25 different food-producing businesses. And the idea is that it can be this kind of mini example of a circular economy in action, specifically focusing on small food businesses. Right now, with the circular economy, it's kind of a global conversation, and a lot of the people that can participate in the circular economy are corporations and folks that have a whole boatload of money. So in the case of the plant, it's kind of a unique experiment in that there's all these small startup businesses, and they aren't normally a part of the circular economy conversation. So for example, there is a beer brewery, there's coffee, there's cheese, there's a spice distributor, there is a mushroom company, indoor farms, outdoor farms. There is an aquaponics system, which I'll get to in a little bit, and that's one of Plant Chicago's projects. There's a bunch of honeybees on the roof. There's about 30 honeybee hives. There's a random ice company in the basement that's called Just Ice, and they make Just Ice. They're very buff people that like make a bunch of giant blocks of ice and sell them to cocktail bars. There is a chocolate company, there's ice cream, there are 2 bakeries, there's a tap room in the building. The idea being that all these different businesses produce a waste product that can be refueled and repurposed into another system or business within the building. The largest business of those that produces the most amount of waste would be the beer brewery, which the spent grain from the beer brewery can fuel the outdoor farms by making nice compost and soil outside. There are 3 acres of land outside, which is really nice. It's not a whole lot, but it's pretty good for the city of Chicago. And then you can also use the spent grain to grow mushrooms. There's a mushroom company that sells the mushrooms at the farmer's market. You can use the spent grain to make these bio briquettes to use for the wood-fired oven in the bakery. So instead of the bakery using wood, they can use these bio briquettes made from spent grain and also coffee chaff. You can also grow mushrooms off of coffee. And there's just a lot of really cool collaborative things that can happen when you have all these different businesses together in one space. Little quick detail about the structure of the building is that it's owned by a company called Bubbly Dynamics, and they're basically like a for-profit company, but they don't flip buildings per se, but they have a focus on reusing materials as much as possible. In the case of this building, it's kind of like a piece of artwork that they've created in this weird like industrial, I don't know, they've taken old smokehouses, for example, and made them into bathrooms, and they've kept like the old meat rails and things like that. So they only own 3 buildings, and they're obsessed with the stockyards, and they own 3 buildings in the stockyards area, which focus on reusing materials as much as possible. And they basically created this idea. And then Plant Chicago, the organization that I work for, is actually a nonprofit inside the building that runs these different educational and kind of like community-based programs. There's also over here on this this diagram, there's a picture of the anaerobic digester, which is something that Bubbly Dynamics has as well, and eventually it'll be able to process 15 tons of food waste a day to create a biogas, which eventually will be able to create energy for the building. It's not done yet, so it's not that exciting, but that is a cool prospect of a thing that's happening within the building. Cool. So in a local circular economy, a business should create economic value based on the capacity of local ecosystems to regenerate, address the needs and aspirations of local stakeholders, and then increase local human knowledge and capacity around circular economy practices. So we do a bunch of education programs, which I manage that program. We do mainly K through 12 education. We do hands-on workshops or closed-loop labs. As of right now, we offer 6 different closed-loop labs based around circular economy principles and concepts. So for example, on the right-hand side, you got this little girl, she's holding a worm. We do a worm composting lab. On the left-hand side of this image, you've got our aquaponics design challenge, where students actually build their own aquaponics system. I guess I should mention that too. Plant Chicago runs a small aquaponics system in the basement, and aquaponics combines aquaculture, raising fish. We've got perch, tilapia, and goldfish, as well as hydroponics, which is growing plants in water, so you can actually use that fish waste as fertilizer for the plants to grow. And a lot of our education programs are based around that circular model of growing stuff using aquaponics, just because it is a really cool example of a closed loop system. And then students get to kind of engage in science and STEM topics around those circular ideas. And here are all of our cute pictures of kids doing stuff. We've got the system design challenge. We did one on water chemistry, which I actually did this morning. Life cycle of a salad, where students actually harvest a salad, and then we talk about cycles of food scraps, how that can go into the soil, and we feed our scraps to the worms, and they build a salad together, which is super fun. We do one specifically on the circular economy, vermicomposting, and then pollinators. We also do programming for university students and adults. One specifically, which is a circular economy workshop, where it's kind of like a concept mapping activity where students compare the life cycle of a typical plastic bottle that's designed for a one-time use with a functioning forest ecosystem, and then looking at the forest ecosystem, considering different ways that our current line of production of plastic could become more circular. And then afterwards, we have the students break out into smaller groups and identify different city sectors within Chicago and think about how can Chicago as a city become more sustainable and circular, and what kinds of steps would need to happen in order for that to take place. So community outreach, a huge part of the circular economy is prioritizing local, or at least in the way that we think about it with Plant Chicago. So we collaborate with local back of the yards businesses, schools, and residents always. All of our programming is free for back of the yards residents. And on the right-hand side, we're doing a nutrition class at another partner organization. So we do a lot of nutrition classes. We donate a lot of the things that we're growing. And then a huge thing really is the science education programs that are free for kids that live in the neighborhood, because there's not a whole lot of field trips in this area that you can just walk to. So it's really helpful for these kids to be able to just walk over. This year we did 30% of all of our programs for free to students that live in back of the yards, which was pretty sweet. So that's an example of that. Circular economy research. And I know I don't have too much time, so I'll try to buzz through the rest of these. So some examples of circular economy happening. On the right-hand side, this is kind of a crazy thing. We had an intern, Eva, who made a wallet out of kombucha SCOBY, which is like the thing that floats on top of the kombucha and eats up sugar. And she took that and flattened it out and made it into this leather. So there are 2 kombucha brewing businesses in the building, and that's their main waste product, is the SCOBY that it creates. And that was a fun way to think about reusing it. We also breed mealworms, which is a cool thing to talk to about with kids. And mealworms are opportunistic eaters, so they actually eat whatever is closest to them, and they can, because of their microbial structure, process styrofoam, which is kind of wild. And we do other types of things, such as growing mushrooms. So we grow mushrooms off of spent grain from the beer brewery. Over here on the far right, that is a black soldier fly hatchery, which was pretty wild, and they eat up like meat scraps and things like that, so we were experimenting with that. In the middle here, that's a bio-briquette project, so that's what I was talking about earlier with the spent grain and those briquettes going into the wood-fired oven. Down in the further left corner, that's a mini example of an anaerobic digester. That was just a fun intern project. Got a little dangerous because this balloon literally filled with methane, so we had to stop the project. And then we also have an algae bioreactor, which we can harvest the algae from these tubes to feed the fish in the aquaponics system. Aquaponics. So this is a really intense looking tilapia on the left. It produces waste. You can use the waste to fertilize the plants. Plants are not using soil at all. Their roots hang down to the water, soak up those nutrients in the form of nitrogen from the fish waste. it's just a really cool way to talk about closing waste loops. And then a lot of students that are coming here are high school students that are learning the nitrogen cycle. So it's a really easy way to think about the nitrogen cycle. In the fish waste, there's ammonia, and then you use bacteria to process the ammonia and convert it into nitrogen. So we got aquaponics. And then last but not least, we do a lot of small business support and food access. So in terms of supporting small businesses, we support businesses that are inside the plant, so a lot of those food businesses that I mentioned earlier, as well as other businesses within back of the yards to try to figure out how they can reduce their waste or collaborate with each other to give each other their different waste products. So once a month we convene small businesses together to share knowledge and resources. We also do waste audits, which is just a fancy way of saying that we dig through people's trash and show them the results and talk about different ways that they can reduce the waste that they have, or if there's another business that could utilize that waste product that they're creating, if that could happen. As well as just kind of thinking about what products are they purchasing and how could it be smarter. Right now we're working on a toolkit for small businesses in the circular economy, which will launch this fall, which has been very exciting. That is going to be free and open source, and we're going to share that on the internet, and it'll provide guidelines for businesses to participate in the circular economy. Cool. And then we got a farmers market, which is very fun. So farmers markets are at the plant year-round, every first Saturday of the month, which is very cool. Great thing about the farmers market is that a lot of the businesses that are based here inside the plant are able to sell their stuff there. And since there's a lot of indoor growing operations, we can provide fresh, local food year-round. So at the plant, year-round, every first Saturday of the month, so actually this Saturday, and then in the summertime, our market goes on tour throughout the neighborhood 12 times in the summer. So, for example, this summer we were at churches and community buildings, random parking lots where people would let us set up a farmer's market, and it's usually organizations or churches that come to us and ask us to bring the farmer's market over there, and then we do it, we set it all up. Cool thing about the farmer's market is that we actually accept the Illinois Link Card, which is food stamps or EBT, and we double that value up to $25. So if you swiped your card for $25, you would get $50. It's a huge incentive to go to a farmer's market because a lot of these products are a little bit more expensive.
Cassandra, you are just about out of time.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Well, I'm done. So these are some upcoming events. If anyone's in Chicago, we got a volunteer orientation, we got a farmer's market, kombucha brewing 101, and then all-day aquaponic training. Yay! Done.
Thank you so much. And I'm gonna move us along to the next question, because if you have questions for Cassandra, you can actually ask them here as well. And what we would like to do here is, in addition to questions of clarification, that you might say, oh, Cassandra, who funds this? You have a short answer question. We're going to have time for you to answer those. But if you have more significant questions, an example of that might be how are you working with local governments to replicate and expand your work? That may take a little more time to answer. So if you would put questions of significance into the chat pod up here, that would be great. And while I'm giving you time to do that, I'm interested, does anybody have questions of clarification for Cassandra? And Cassandra, I actually do have one, which was, how does the, and you may have said it, but I didn't hear it, how is this funded?
Sure. So our programs, we have gotten some large governmental grants through the USDA and also the EPA to start our farmers market and our education program, which are unfortunately no longer available. But we do a lot of family foundations. So this requires us to do a lot of grant writing, and yeah, we've got a lot of small family foundations, some smaller grants from corporations, things like that. And then our education program is really the only program that we offer that turns a revenue and makes a profit. So some of our programming that is free is subsidized by paid programming.
Thank you. Any other questions of clarification for Kassandra? It looks like Robert has put a question for you in the chat box. Kassandra, is the aquaponics training offered by Plant Chicago tailored towards small home-based gardening or large, more commercial-oriented farming?
So we get, I'd say, anyone that's really interested in starting up aquaponics, whether it is home-based gardening or commercial-based organization. I would say most often it's people who are interested in doing this in their own home, so a smaller operation. It's a lot of teachers as well that are interested in building something like that for their classroom as a teaching tool. So I would say mostly small, but then there are those people that are interested in just learning a little bit more about aquaponics and how they can turn that into a business as well.
Thank you. And I see Adam. Adam has a comment. I really enjoyed hearing about the diversity of elements in what's to be an interesting community.
No, I didn't have a question.
Adam, did you have a question associated with this?
It seemed like there was a lot of similar things happening, so I just enjoyed hearing about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And I feel like Chicago is just kind of far behind in a lot of these things. Like Vermont, you guys are on it. Minneapolis, way to go. But Chicago, in terms of recycling and just food waste and composting, it's not looking too great. And I see a kind of a related question about that. Does the city of Chicago collect compost materials for homes? No. And that's one of the bigger issues here. There are some for-profit businesses that go around and collect compost for a fee. But I know that Minneapolis, for example, does municipal composting at home, which is a huge incentive. But Chicago, in our waste system, is a whole other can of worms, so to speak. So it's going to take a little bit more incentives probably for our government to make those changes.
Thank you. And I see there's some other specific questions for Kassandra in this, but I want to ask a question of the whole panel. So Caitlin, Adam, and Kassandra, how can interested people like us use and support your work? What have you learned and what you've done about how to get the word out, how to get the larger community to engage in this work or these practices? And I think, Adam, I'd like to start with you on that because you're really a sort of a one-person show that's expanded to have other people through the EPM Foundation and others learn about your work.
I think that
how do we get the word out about these great key stories that you've shared?
But unfortunately, in this modern world, it's sort of finding money because you can have all sorts of great ideas, but unless you can find the money to back it, things are usually stifled. And so I've tried different things like public meetings, which I enjoy. I mean, separate from like doing a planning process for a community. I've had public meetings in Cuenca. I've done public meetings in the United States. I would say that I had more success going directly to giant NGOs, but every project is so different. I wish I knew more. I'd say it's more of a mystery. I wish I had a more solid answer for you.
Oh, so I was unmuting myself. Hopefully it worked. So I think there's an interesting dynamic. This is Caitlin, by the way. For example, Plant Chicago is a part of our network. So the network that I was talking about, we had one of our network meetings there, which was great, and we were able to, we've also hosted meetings there before, but in the most recent history, there's a level of being able to showcase the work that's already going on. So I'll say that I agree wholeheartedly that this economic factor is hard to overcome and would definitely support the work of us as network organizers. But in terms of my specific project, a lot of it is being able to raise up the work of what's already happening here in Chicago. And to some extent, when engaging with residents here in Chicago, a lot of that is meeting them where they're at. They might not have a huge, robust vocabulary in terms of sustainability or environmental movements. And in order to sort of support that learning process of learning about sustainability in general and being open to seeing new areas of sustainability or a more holistic lens. In terms of using it, we're trying as an organization to do something similar to what Cassie was mentioning at the end, which is sort of a toolkit. How do you frame the way in which you got to a place or structure it in a way that it can be replicated? And I think that's an interesting exploration of documenting your process and then also sharing it. So this isn't exactly answering your question, but I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of room for both just being open to learning more and sharing the word of the work that's already happening, and then this idea of helping to craft the toolkit or the model or discussions on how to make it a roadmap, I suppose. And I'm complete.
Yeah, I mean, we're working on this toolkit. I know Karen asked a question of how would a community launch a circular economy like the plant. I guess the first step is creating this toolkit so other
Cassie,
businesses could
anything
do
you want to
something
add?
similarly, or other buildings could. I do know that the folks that own this building as well, Bubbly Dynamics, they do consulting and they are really open to having conversations with people about what their process was of purchasing this building and doing this kind of similar project. In terms of just engaging people, I feel like working with K through 12 students in the younger generation has been really big for us because they are, as kind of cheesy as it sounds, they are the future, and they are like more on this than adults that I talk to are. They just have this more of a circular way of thinking of things. And so the more that we can engage young people and students to be thinking about this type of just circular economy ideas, principles, sustainability in general, I think the better. So kind of trying to engage those students and then other communities that wouldn't necessarily have access to this type of conversation.
And Cassie, you have a question on mealworms and a question on compost in the city of Chicago. I'm going to ask if you would respond to those when we move to the next slide. And this is for all of you. All of us can put into this chat pot what are insights and learnings that you've had as you've listed these three presentations, and what are the implications for our ES work. So I'm going to give like 2 to 3 minutes for people to fill this in, and this will be very helpful information for us as we go ahead. And
I love talking about mealworms. We started actually through an intern project
so Cassie,
breeding
do
these
you want to talk
mealworms,
about
and
mealworms?
really it was just we purchased mealworms on the internet, and they, like I mentioned before, they are opportunistic eaters, so they eat whatever is closest to them. And there's some cool research articles on the internet that you can find about the microbial structure and the bacteria that live inside of mealworms that allow them to actually process styrofoam in an environmentally sustainably way. And they basically just like process that thing. So we took an old filing cabinet, which is kind of gnarly, and we love to freak kids out by opening up this filing cabinet and showing them the worms. And so not only do we have mealworms, but we also have a big worm composting. I like to call it a farm. It's probably not a farm, but we've got like a worm composting setup where kids can interact with the regular red wigglers and then talk about decomposition and composting and why that's important and why reusing and having a better use for our food scraps is a good thing. Yeah, it's a spooky one. It's good.
Thank you. When I come to Chicago, I'm going to have to see that particular cabinet. Oh. It looks like people are still typing, so we'll take another minute. And if you're not typing, take a look at what some of the comments are in the Insight.
Yes, Cassie, there's a question from John Porterfield in the chat pod for you.
You can scroll to see more. And somebody has a hand up.
In the lower left-hand corner.
Emily Haskins, Urban Agriculture Specialist at U.S. Botanical Garden in D.C. I met her while lobbying with Ceres at 75 Major. Yeah, sure. That sounds cool.
Which chat
Emily
pod?
Haskins? I'll take it. John Porterfield?
Okay. We have more comments coming in. Looks like we are on implications. And Adam, I'm going to ask if you would read over the Insights comments while people are finishing up on the implications one. You don't need to read names. It's just so that we can hear what people said, and we're then going to have a conversation on what are some of the themes that are coming out of the Insights and implications. So Adam, if you wouldn't mind reading the Insights, and I'm going to ask Cassie if she would read the implications when you're done.
Mealworms. Maps show a picture of culture. Love the circular economy and small business examples, so needed. I'll second that one. The circular economy is just a great concept to be working with. Connecting with the existing groups is so important and appreciated. Start with storytelling and move to collective data gathering and planning. Always useful to see the cultural significance as a common theme of environmental sustainability work in rural and urban environments. Yeah, it's true. The similarities between urban and rural, we're still dealing with people. Making sustainability holistic. Cassie makes the K for the kids. I can't read that one. It's great to see how inspired people drive a process forward and how we can share using this technology. Here we are, like, could be anywhere on the planet, and I'm just appreciating that we're just having like this little chat situation here. Do I have more to read here? Oh yes, I do. I thought of biocorridors kind of like bridges that physically link areas that animals would just easily walk through. I'm now realizing that this is a much more complicated than I realized. The map visuals were very powerful in understanding the implications. Everything needs to migrate, so we need to protect corridors. And then last right here, we were just hearing about the fires in the Amazon on national TV. What is the implications connected to the corridors? What are the implications? Right now, the situation is so hot, I wouldn't even know what the implications are, but when things settle down a little bit, then we can sit back and look at what's left, and then we could try to stitch together fragments. So that's everything that I see in Insights.
All right, so we got some implications. We do not need to tear down old buildings.
Thank
we can
you,
create new
and we'll
uses
have
for
Cassie
them.
read implications.
Have
John is
funders at
typing
all
a comment.
presentations
We'll
and
come
case
back and
stories.
pick him up
Yeah,
after
invite the
Cassie reads
funders. That's
over
amazing.
the
Get a core group of
implications.
people who are invested and creative and don't need to control everything to see what can be done to launch projects. Need the hopefulness these examples give us. That's nice. Want to visit the building in Chicago next time I'm there? Yeah, come, plantchicago.org. Develop a book list that we can share. Adam, I am reminded of our butterfly corridors in Minneapolis. Really leveraging the power of community to move more holistically and impactfully. Oops, there's more. Provide information to inform decisions and understanding. Having more conversations on the international level.
Thank you, Cassie. And John wrote in the Insights and Learnings, Adam, any comments on Ecuador connecting two eastern parks? I believe they linked in 5 rather than EW. That's a question, John, versus an insight or a learning, and I'm going to suggest that Adam write a response to you in the chat box so that we'll move forward on the things that are the key themes from this webinar that we want to remember. And at this point, anybody can speak. You don't need to raise your hand. You just need to unmute, and I'm going to type. So
Coordinate
who would like to
funders.
start? What is the key theme that we want to take away from this webinar that we might want to share with other people as well? We actually had someone in our last webinar on community development who was a funder, and when she heard all of the complaints about funders that came out, she said, I need to really understand this better. It was a great
One
success.
theme for me is,
all right.
I wrote it down, but it's still
What's
chiming
the theme,
in for me, is
an insight that we want to carry forward, we want to share with
energized to move something forward. And then, of course, here we're using technology to spread the word a little bit, but the beginning of all of this is people who are inspired and have the energy to put out and like move a process forward.
Jane, this is Carolyn. I'll say the wisdom of crowds, and meaning bringing very diverse ideas, experiences, and perspectives for really comprehensive solutions.
Others. Thank you. I don't know that I got this fully, Carolyn, but you can correct me later if you want. All right. Anything else? Any other kind of core idea
How about
that is coming out
the involving the children?
That we want to capture? We'll integrate them with the other 2 webinars coming up. So we want to get them down if they're percolating up for you.
Well, I was just going to mention something, but now I'm forgetting. In the processes I've been in, we try really hard to make sure women are involved.
Great.
But we haven't worked hard to involve children. So that's an interesting concept to consider. I'd like to add that in some of what I'm thinking about for planning.
There's so many great ideas that came out about how to engage kids, and I just wish I will say that the presentations, hopefully Cassie, you can share yours. Adam, you're willing to put them into the PowerPoint. Your PowerPoint's in the share pod.
This is
We are
Kathleen.
recording this session,
I heard
and
it
will be available
sometimes
to
addressed
others.
specifically, sometimes more in the background, but
Anything
the
else
kind
that we
of
want to capture
economics
before I
of
move
small
on to our
business
closing
and
slides?
that connection to which to me underscores a sustainability rather than something that just wholly is funded by well-meaning foundations. So that economics piece, that engaging people in their own supporting their neighborhood and supporting themselves and their families. I'm complete.
And even, Kathleen, if I can add a comment onto that, even having small businesses supported by sustainable activities like the mushroom growing from the remainders of the beer making, and yeah, okay, great. You can always put something in the chat pod if another thought comes up to you that we didn't get in the notes. I'll add them later. What I would like to do is on this page, just really briefly, if you have not filled in the questions yet, you still have a chance to do that. We do have a file pod up here. Do you see where it says Files To? It's a little tiny icon. You can download information of the presenter's bios and a little bit of information about ICA, the Technology of Participation, and the Center for Strategic Facilitation are all there. We will add to those as we have other webinars. And if our presenters are agreeable, we will also put in their PowerPoint presentations. So Adam, Caitlin, and Kassandra, would you give a green check if we can upload your presentations to the file pods? Caitlin is a yes. If you can't, you don't. Don't worry about it. Adam is, and Kassandra, where did our Kassandra go? Oh, I'm not seeing her right now, so we'll check with her about it later. What I'd like to share over here on our right is in January in Walnut Creek, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area of California, we are having our top network annual gathering. Robert, who's on this call, is our co-host for it. And Robert, I'm just going to go ahead and do the presentation even though you're here. We are going to be having a wonderful conference with lots of different activities, but part of it is an afternoon session on Sunday where 4 social impact areas will have 4 hours of time to really talk in more depth about the topics. One of those is environmental sustainability, and Karen Bain and Caitlin and Carolyn are all people who are going to be working on that environmental sustainability time together. And we would like to get your input in the chat box of, are there books, are there movies, are there articles, are there podcasts, are there stations, magazines, people that should definitely inform how that session on environmental sustainability goes. And I had mentioned earlier a book list. I would love to see us put together a book list, and one of the books on it, I'm just going to put in there, is John Todd's, who's from Vermont, Adam, writings on zero waste systems. And I have a feeling Kassandra might also know John Todd because a lot of their work is based similar to what he's doing. So if you have thoughts about things we should be thinking about or including in the design of that January session, please type them in and add them, or people we should invite to participate and do a case story. We had 3 great case stories today. What are case stories that we want to include in the conference in January? And I don't see anybody typing, but I know you've got great resources, so add them in. And then I'm just quickly going to highlight the two webinars coming up. On October 3rd, between 2 and 4 p.m., Ecuador time and Central time, Carolyn Blady is going to share the work that they've done in Alameda County around implementing the sustainability plan. And this has been a very far-ranging project that has impacted far beyond Alameda County, but it has had very exciting things that have happened within Alameda County. Caitlin is going to further share work about the actual edificio, the building in Chicago, and how over the last, what would you say, 10 or 15 years, Caitlin, has shifted from a wonderful old building to a building that is called Green Rise and has the largest number of nonprofits for immigrant aid west of the Mississippi, I believe, and all kinds of exciting things going on there. So she's going to share that. And we're going to have two short presentations, one on restorative building and one on sustainable agriculture. One is from Walnut Creek and one is from Ecuador. A sustainable architect's going to share some of the work she's done here, which involves people doing their own sustainable building. And then on the 4th, we're going to have our final webinar, which is going to focus on citizens' climate lobby in the U.S. and taking green action. So this is wonderful. We hope you'll join us for those. We will be sending out an invitation for people to come and join with us. And let's see if we're getting some interesting comments in there about things that we want to have in our help us form this wonderful 4-hour block of time we have in January. And I will very quickly share with you, I see we have a number of people who have taken the quiz, and I'm going to broadcast the results. Can you all see these results on how much of Earth's resources do we use, how we saw it? And in actuality, it is the last answer. We are overusing 150% of the Earth's ability to resources from the Earth's ability to regenerate. And then this is what country just got the prestigious Level 3 Environmental Sustainability Award for airports. And there's answers of Netherlands, Brazil, San Francisco International. Now those may be true. Let's see, I need to broadcast those results so you can see them too. But the one that just got it was Quito, Ecuador, and I'm so proud of this country. They're also working with all their vendors and the airlines to reduce impact of their waste cycles and their impact on the environment. So yay, Ecuador! All right. Any other comments on those? There may have been some other answers. Oh, look at that. We've got Ecuador, and we've got Indonesia. Now, some of these countries, like the Netherlands and Scandinavian countries, have very strong airports with lots of environmental features. Now, in our last few minutes, from Caitlin, Carolyn, Karen, and myself, I would very much like to invite you to just make a few comments about what worked well today in this webinar, what suggestions you have, and one thing you're taking away. And we would really appreciate that because we have 2 more webinars coming up. We're learning from all of them, and your comments will make a difference to us.
I've sent an email to her to see, but we probably will get it up there, and it'll be in the recording.
Presentation shared, and it looks like Kassandra's is not up yet, but we'll get it up there, and you can download those if you're interested. Great. Thank you, Kathy. Take just another minute or two for people to respond, and I'm going to ask each of us who are still on the call to add a comment as we leave. This time we'll start at the bottom with Robert and we'll work upward of one thing you are taking away
one
from
thing I'm
our
taking away
seminar,
is the
our
importance
webinar
of
today.
involving people in the
And you can
community.
continue to type. Remember to unmute your phone. And Robert, would you start us off with one thing you're taking away from this webinar today?
I guess the circular economy.
Ricardo.
I love that.
It looks like you're muted. So let's go to Rebecca and we'll come back and pick you up. If you unmute your microphone, I'll see that you're ready.
I would say it was cool to hear from a bunch of different projects happening all over the world.
We haven't had any response from Ken so far, so
with
I'm
our
not
work
sure
that we do
that Ken
at
is
Plant
hooked
Chicago,
in auditorily.
it can be
So
very
Cassie,
specific to Chicago because we focus on local really hard. But that also, we don't get to hear these global stories that often, so it's really cool to hear those great work that everybody else is doing.
Yeah, I am taking away really thinking about the community and starting with the community, and I'm fascinated with how we can use that better than the nod that's often given to public participation. And I'm complete.
I don't think can anyone hear me? You were not able to hear me before. Oh, you can.
John, we're up to you now.
Overall, it's very energizing to engage in this thing. The notes that I've left, or the use of the Adobe tool is the best that I've seen so far, and I do webinars all the time. Congratulations on that. There's a little bit of balancing act with it, but it was done very deftly. I really like these tools that people are developing, like the toolkit that Caitlin was presenting that ICA has developed for small business. And I'm sure that Kathy has got some tools that she's used for her education programs at the plant, and it would be really interesting to see some of the content and how that's designed. So those were, primary inspirations that I had. And Adam, I hope I get a chance to meet you, probably around Quinca at some point. Sure.
Hi, this is Carolyn. I'm just taking away a feeling of encouragement at the diversity of these efforts, and hearing from other regions. And I think sometimes
I'm looking forward to meeting you
doing this work can feel like you're just not getting enough done. So every time I do something like this and hear more stories, I'm like, okay, yes, there are a lot of people doing this, and we can make an impact.
Yeah, Carolyn, I would echo that. I think feeling some days pretty helpless and hopeless about the state of our environmental world, and so really taking some energy and excitement from these presentations. Thank you all.
Ricardo, I see you put something in the top chat box. Would you like to say anything? If you unmute your microphone, you are able to do so.
This is Kathy, and I just want to say thank you to the three presenters.
Right.
What a wonderful job you did, and enlightening me in many ways. And I thought I knew something, and I'm just learning more and more. So it's great. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Oh, well, I appreciated hearing from our global community. I learned a lot.
Nancy, I think you already spoke, so let's finish up with Caitlin. Caitlin, you can finish us off. We want to thank you all for participating and for making this a really interesting time to be together and to learn about projects that in many ways have some common themes and in others represent very different aspects of the environmental sustainability field. We hope you'll join us on the next call when Carolyn and Caitlin will be presenting, and